Hello, and welcome to the Global Autism Project's Supervision Topics. I'm your presenter, and my name is Anne Byrne, and I'm the Clinical Director of the Global Autism Project. Today's topic is science versus pseudoscience. This is a topic that comes up a lot in our work as behavior analysts, particularly for those of us working with individuals with autism spectrum disorder. And it's also featured pretty heavily in the guidelines for responsible conduct and in the 4th edition task list. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to tell science versus pseudoscience. We'll talk a bit about the standards of evidence-based practice and also what that means for our fields. And this topic covers some of the sections of 2 and 3 of the 4th edition task list, which is published by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. And it's also covered in the guidelines for responsible conduct for behavior analysts. And specifically, the guideline that it relates to is Guideline 2.10, Treatment Efficacy. The behavior analyst always has the responsibility to recommend scientifically supported, most effective treatment procedures. Effective treatment procedures have been validated as having both long-term and short-term benefits to clients and to society. And paragraph B states clients have a right to effective treatment, i.e. based on the research literature and adapted to the individual client. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly that means, what that obligation to focus on scientifically validated treatment means when we're working with individuals with autism spectrum disorder. So first we'll talk about science. Dr. Gina Green is one of the leading authorities on science versus pseudoscience. And she wrote Chapter 2 in Behavioral Intervention for Young Children with Autism, which is entitled Evaluating Claims About Treatments for Autism. This book is edited by Catherine Maurice, whose name you may recognize as the author of the book Let Me Hear Your Voice. For those of you who don't already own a copy of Let Me Hear Your Voice, I strongly encourage you to pick one up. It is an absolutely beautifully written account of her own family's journey through applied behavior analysis treatment for 2 of her children. She has 3 children rather, and 2 were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders and later recovered after receiving applied behavior analysis. So it's absolutely a gorgeously written account and very personal account of the power of what we do. So I strongly recommend that you pick one up. As well as a copy of Behavioral Intervention for Young Children with Autism. Both are really, really important additions to the Behavior Analyst bookshelf. So first, we'll take a look at a definition of science, and this is worded by Dr. Green. Science relies on direct, objective observation and measurement of phenomena, systematic arrangement of events, procedures to rule out alternative explanations for what is observed, and repeated demonstrations. And that repeated demonstrations is a really important component. If it can't be replicated, it's not science. Pseudoscience, on the other hand, again in the words of Dr. Green, treats phenomena that do not have the hallmarks of scientific method as if they were scientific. So they might use scientific terminology like law. One of the more sneaky versions I've heard is using the name Johns Hopkins University as opposed to Johns Hopkins University. But they sort of cloak themselves in the language of science without actually having scientific evidence. Anti-science, to its credit, is at least a little bit easier to figure out. Anti-science is the outright rejection of time-tested methods of science as a means of producing valid and useful facts. So this is just sort of a general distrust of science in general and the scientific community. So what are some of the components of science? Some that really relate to the difference between science and pseudoscience are determinism, parsimony, and philosophic doubt. Determinism is the presumption that the universe is a lawful and orderly place in which all phenomena occur as the result of other events. So often behavior analysts will hear someone say, well, he just does this out of the blue, or, he does this for no reason, or it could be anything. And my response is usually, well, yeah, it could be anything, but it must be something. So our job now is to figure out what that something is, because all phenomena occur as the result of other events. And parsimony. Parsimony is the idea that all simple logical explanations must be ruled out before more complex or abstract explanations are considered. So, for example, a better explanation for less parsimonious explanation for a tantrum might be this child has a lot of unconscious anger, perhaps because he overheard his mother saying something negative about him when he was still in the womb. That involves a lot of assumptions, making it a much more complex and abstract explanation. First, we need to assume that there is some unconscious anger. Then we need to assume that he heard something in the womb, that he understood it, and that he remembers it. And this is an actual theory that has been proposed to explain behavior. An idea that might be more simple and logical and involve fewer assumptions is maybe he's having a tantrum because he wants to get out of this task, or has a history of reinforcement in some way. So all simple logical explanations, those that include the fewest assumptions, must be ruled out before more complex explanations are considered. And one of my favorite aspects of science is philosophic doubt. Philosophic doubt is the continual questioning of the truthfulness and validity of all scientific theory and knowledge. One of the beauties of science is that anything that we think we know today, we could find out tomorrow that we have new information and have to change our theories. So it's this constant search for more information. What I find particularly beautiful about this, particularly as a behavior analyst, is that it indicates that there's no such thing as an unsolvable problem. There are only solutions that we have not yet found. There is much more that we don't know than there is that we do know. And so philosophic doubt is one of my favorite hallmarks of science. So now we're going to go into some of the examples of pseudoscientific traps. One is circular reasoning. Another is a need to have faith or believe in a particular methodology. And a third is manipulating facts to support one's theory. Circular reasoning. In this particular fallacy, the reasoner begins with what he or she is trying to end up with. And this next example is used a lot by Dr. Bobby Newman when he presents on this topic. So if you ask, why is that boy in the corner? You might get the response, because he's shy. Okay, well, what makes you think he's shy, or how do you know that he's shy? Because he's in the corner. And now we're back to the beginning. Why is he in the corner? Because he's shy. It becomes this, one of the things about going in circles, you never actually get anywhere. So you're stuck in this constant motion of theories that are impossible to prove or disprove. Another example is this child has a lot of unconscious anger. Well, why do you think he has unconscious anger? Because there's a lot of aggression. Okay, well, why does he have a lot of aggression? Because of his unconscious anger. What makes you think he has unconscious anger? Because of his aggression, and so on and so forth. And back around again we go. Another hallmark of pseudoscience is the idea of faith. So if it doesn't work, you didn't believe it enough. This was a popular proposal with a methodology called facilitated communication, which was very popular years ago and continues to be somewhat popular as a methodology as an alternative communication for individuals with autism spectrum disorder. And if in this methodology, one the person with autism spectrum disorder would be the communicator and would be given a letter board or a computer keyboard. And someone else would be the facilitator and would support their hand while they indicated letters to spell a variety of different things. And if one facilitator, so the person supporting the hand, got less favorable results than another, they were told, oh, well, you really didn't think that this kid was going to type, so they didn't type for you because they knew that you didn't believe in them. So here again, this becomes impossible to prove or disprove. And the difference between facts and theory and the relationship between the two. The theory must be developed from the facts and not the other way around. One example from my own career, I worked with a family who took a child to a provider and was told children with autism spectrum disorder have very weak immune systems, so they get sick all the time. And the family responded, well, actually, my son doesn't get sick all the time. In fact, he never gets sick. So the provider then said, oh, well, there you go. His immune system is too good and he never gets sick. And so somehow, even though the facts were contrary to what the provider was originally saying, the theory still seemed to hold water. So the theory has to be developed from the facts and not the other way around. We can't manipulate our facts to suit our theories. So now we're going to talk a bit about evidence-based practice. So what makes something evidence-based? We might hear people say, oh, I read this somewhere, or my doctor told me, or it's just common sense, or it was on the internet. And none of those things make things particularly evidence-based. Evidence-based is a very specific designation. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. So here's the definition of evidence-based practice. To be considered an evidence-based practice for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, efficacy or effectiveness must be established through peer-reviewed research in scientific journals. That means that things that are presented at workshops or at conferences don't meet this criterion. One would hope that those workshops and conferences would be based on things that have met this criterion and that they reflect what has been in peer-reviewed research in scientific journals. But those presentations haven't been peer-reviewed, so they don't meet this standard. And the types of evidence that can be used to support evidence-based practice would be randomized or quasi-experimental design studies, single-subject design studies, or a combination of evidence. So first, we'll talk about randomized or quasi-experimental design studies. This is the type of study where you would have one control group that receives the treatment or receives it in one amount, and or rather experimental group that receives the treatment or receives it in one amount, and a control group that does not. So you would have two high-quality experimental or quasi-experimental group design studies. Now, to support applied behavior analysis and specifically early intensive behavioral intervention as a treatment for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, we have actually several high-quality experimental and quasi-experimental group design studies. And single subject design studies are also meet the standard for evidence-based practice. And in this case, it would be 3 different investigators or research groups that have conducted 5 high-quality single subject design studies. And again, these are published in peer-reviewed journals. And again, there's this emphasis on replication. It's not just one study that does it, it has to be several. Now, applied behavior analysis more than exceeds this standard. We have entire journals devoted to single subject design studies on the effectiveness of applied behavior analysis. So this is sort of our big ace in the hole is the single subject design support for applied behavior analysis. Or there could be a combination of evidence. So you can have one high-quality randomized or quasi-experimental group design study and 3 high-quality single-subject design studies conducted by at least 3 different investigators or research groups. So again, there is this emphasis on replication and replication by different researchers. So why does this matter? Well, one of the reasons that it matters is something that is still controversial today. Wakefield in 1998 claimed a link between the measles, mumps, rubella vaccines and autism, along with a link between those vaccines and bowel disease. To date, no other research has supported this now discredited theory. In fact, many of his co-authors disavowed themselves from this study, and some of the data was considered fraudulent, and the study itself was considered deeply flawed. And this is a quote from the New England Journal of Medicine. The 1998 publication of an article recently retracted by The Lancet, which was the journal which first published it and later ended up retracting it because so many issues were found with that article. Recently retracted by The Lancet by Wakefield et al., created a worldwide controversy over the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine by claiming that it played a causative role in autism. This claim led to decreased use of the MMR vaccine in Britain, Ireland, the United States, and other countries. Ireland, in particular, experienced measles outbreaks in which there were more than 300 cases, 100 hospitalizations, and 3 deaths. Now, it's important to remember when hearing these numbers that because of the effectiveness of the MMR vaccine, that was preventable. This is a preventable illness. So, in my opinion, the only acceptable number of people dying from a preventable illness is 0. So now, what does it mean for our field to have this focus on evidence-based practice? There are 2 things that have historically happened in autism treatment, and because there was a lack of emphasis on evidence-based practice. And one is the popularity of the refrigerator mother theory. When autism was first discovered, one of the sort of demographic characteristics was that it seemed to be heavily concentrated among families where the mothers had advanced degrees and were often professionals. Now, one of the theories was that these women were very cold and that their children chose to have autism because basically they would rather have autism than relate to their families. As you can imagine, this was an incredibly devastating thing for families to hear. It caused a lot of divorces. It caused a lot of suicides. It caused a lot of wasted time in ineffective treatments. So it's a dark part of our history that we do not want to go back to. Another thing that happened a little bit more recently, something I referred to earlier, is the popularity of facilitated communication. Facilitated communication, as I described earlier, is a method where one person would support an individual's hand while that individual typed on a letterboard or a computer keyboard. Now, this was sort of brought to the popular press before there was any sort of scientific validation on whether or not the communication was valid. And it became very, very popular. And teachers wanted to use it in their classrooms and parents wanted to use it with their children. And so schools and institutions and organizations all started using it. Now, what happened was abuse allegations started to come to light. And then people started looking at the quality of the communication that was happening, and it was not up to standard. They also couldn't find any advocates for facilitated communication who would be willing to testify as to the validity of this communication. So that's a little too late. That is when the scientific community decided to take a really close look at whether or not facilitated communication was genuine communication. So they did a study where they had the facilitator, who you remember is the person who was supporting the individual's hand, listening to one set of headphones, and the communicator, the person whose finger was touching the keyboard, listened to another set of headphones, and they would receive two different questions. And what they found was that the overwhelming majority of the time, if this, for example, if the communicator was asked, do you have any brothers or sisters? And the facilitator was asked, what is your favorite food? The response would be macaroni and cheese, for example. And so they found that the overwhelming majority of the time, it was the facilitator who was doing the responding. Now, advocates for facilitated communication said that is absolute bunk. That was a flawed study, and we will show you how well facilitated communication works by replicating that study and getting results with people who, again, this emphasis on faith, with people who know that it's going to work and have faith that these communicators will respond. So they attempted a replication of the study, and they got the same results. So facilitated communication was pretty much stopped in most areas. But again, it was a little too late. Families had been torn apart, and again, a lot of time had been wasted on communication that wasn't genuine communication. So now we have a few discussion questions. What has your experience of science versus pseudoscience been? Has this been an issue in your work, and how have you responded to it? Another discussion question. There's always a complaint that evidence-based practices are primarily ABA strategies. So how do you respond to those who say this is unfair? Now, my own response to them is that it's not that all of the strategies are ABA strategies. We're not just running around in circles and proving our own theories. It's really that ABA alone has the commitment to using evidence-based strategies. So, but how would you respond to people who feel that the evidence-based practices have some sort of bias toward ABA strategies? And the final discussion question, what is the level of philosophic doubt that's appropriate? How open-minded should we be? And I always like to say that you want to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brains fall out. So, so where is that line drawn? How open should we be to that next thing that we might find to be the next evidence-based practice? And if you'd like to do some more reading on this topic, I highly recommend that you check out an article on evidence-based practice from the Association for Science in Autism Treatment. This organization is a wonderful, wonderful resource for weeding through all those pseudoscientific methodologies and getting to the heart of what is research-based. And if you'd like to join us for supervision and discuss this topic and many others, you can check out our website, www.globalautismproject.org/BCBA-supervision, or you can email us at supervision@globalautismproject.org. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter for more supervision topics.